So this last portion here, he says, what ought we to value? And he says, notice something. Science can't tell us to value the well-being of sentient creatures in the first place. We've come to science already valuing that, right? Even if science can tell us which things will result of an increase in well-being, it can't tell us we ought to value well-being.
Right.
This will increase in well-being. Okay, fine. But what does that tell us about what we ought to do, right?
Right.
Even our own. So he says, since information about the consequences of our action does not tell us, this is Peter Singer he's quoting here.
Our friend Peter Singer wants to give rights to animals and put monkeys on trials for killing each other.
Since information about the consequences of our action does not tell us which consequences to value, Singer tells us, but only which actions will or will not bring about the consequences we do value, most ethical theories simply incorporate new information about the consequences of our actions into our ethical decisions. So again, Singer is agreeing here, right? Science cannot tell us what to value.
Yeah. So what he in general is saying is that science can tell you all the parts of what the gun does, the spring, the gunpowder, the
what
rifling,
when the bullet hits you, where it goes, how
right.
it ricochets through the body.
Yeah, but it doesn't tell you should you pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow. Yeah. Science can't determine our antecedent values of well-being, much less anybody else's, right?
Yeah. Which was Harris's entire point in the last two parts that we did, is he's trying to establish well-being because you can measure it, but who cares about establishing other well-being? I can't even establish my own of what should the values be? There's the other, should. What ought they be?
Yeah, right. So science alone cannot tell us that well-being is a moral property or that well-being is simply a matter of brain states. We saw that this depends largely on issues of worldviews, which would include our antecedent views about morality. In other words, our values come from, from how we view the world, our worldview, right? Our presuppositions about the world, our assumptions about the world, that sort of thing. That's where our values come from.
Interesting.
Right? People are valuers. Persons are valuers. He says, what then is the source of morality? And here's what I was just mentioning. As we'll argue in the next chapter, an important sense of the source of morality is us. We are the source of morality, or people, or persons. We value morality, right? What we value morality is up to us, not science. So what we value morally is dependent on us, is what he's suggesting here, right? It's dependent on persons. Persons value. Science doesn't value. The physical empty space doesn't value. Persons value, right? Is what he's trying to say. We choose, right, what we determine to value. We do not find our ethical premises in our biological nature or under cabbages.
So again, what he's saying here is not. He probably isn't going to make the case that a person values something and therefore it's true.
Right.
It's trying to make the point that where do values come from? They come from people valuing things.
Yeah.
And not to belabor the point here, but in the next portion, he really covers it well.
Yeah, good. So it's possible for science, he tells us, to influence our moral actions by telling us that certain actions will result in certain consequences, right? So science can tell us what the consequences can be, to a certain extent. And science might also tell against fundamental moral principles, because suppose he says, I think that science shows that naturalism is true. A commitment to consistency or rationalism might force me to further conclude that there are no human independent moral standards, right? And notice significantly, he says that the fact that we value rationality is itself not something that science can dictate, right? So again, we are valuers, and science is not, and it cannot tell us, right, what to value. It can tell us the consequences if we do something or if we value something and move toward it, but it can't say this is what you ought to do. That's not science's job. Oftentimes folks think, science is the pillar of truth, right?
Yeah.
But science can only do, science is like a hammer. and it can only hit nails, right? There are certain things that hammers can do, and you need other tools for other things. And so valuing is not a nail for science, right?
Right.
It's something else.
Yeah. In things like The Matrix, God bless that movie, because I mean, if it wasn't for The Matrix, we'd only be regulated to Hitler analogies. But there's a point in there where Neo gets told, you have all these people surrounding you and they're all plugged in the Matrix, they're all asleep, and you're the one that's awake, and if they get in your way, unfortunately you have to kill them because you're trying to set them free. Well, I mean, that's a huge ethical dilemma that the movie kind of just glances over. Like, yes, to preserve you, the chosen one, okay, sure, but that's how everyone operates who's free. And so what they don't discuss is, this understanding of, well, it's not just that these are computer simulations or computer code, that's what the agents are for, but that individual people that don't take on this agent form are real people, and you're being told, it's best just to take them out because they could be utilized by the programming or anything like that. And so there's a huge ethical dilemma in there where it's like, okay, ought I kill, the security guard, the poor security guard who's always going to get killed because he's trying to stop me from ending the Matrix to save everybody else. There's your utilitarian argumentation too.
Right.
And so all the computer code is there scientifically, but whether or not you should pull the trigger and take out that individual person that's in the pod next to you, should you do that? Well, I mean, where does that value come from? Neo kind of just takes orders from at that point, but it's an interesting question. I'm sure we could probably do 16 episodes on The Matrix as well.
So he says, next chapter, he's going to finally argue for what he thinks is the morality's foundation. And he tells us, he tips his hand here, morality's foundation is persons, right? That is, moral value is nothing more than personal value, since all value is personal. And he says, if I'm right about this, then we'll have more reason to think that science could never determine human values, as well as even more reason to doubt Harris's account of morality. Right? So that's what he's going to get to. He's going to argue that that's the source of values. The source of values is persons, not science. Science cannot get us there. So what we've seen here is there's this is-ought gap. Right? Hume called it a fallacy, trying to move from what is the case than to tell us what we should do about it. Hume said we can't make that move. That's a logical fallacy. And then we saw that Harris attempts to do that, but he really doesn't give us a good argument for it. He just doesn't like what Hume says, and he says it results in bad consequences. But okay, fine, that's
Sure.
And so then he ends here by saying that really we choose values. Value is based on what persons choose, and so he's going to pursue that the next chapter and try to help us to work that.